For our tree mixtures, we are going to use a combination of yellows. So I have a really bright yellow here, which is a bit too bright. And in order to calm that down a bit, you add a bit of purple, because that is its complement. And it just kind of mellows it out. You could also add yellow ochre to that. And then we need some greens. You can use palette greens. I have a cobalt teal, and I have I believe it's hookers, but I never use them on their own. I usually mix them with something. So if we take the cobalt teal and I mix it with that yellow and a bit of purple and then more cobalt teal, then I'm going to get this color here, which to me looks like it needs a bit of ultramarine. So I'm going to get that color there, which isn't really a bright green, whereas this one over here, the hookers, is a pretty bright green, and I might not mix that with anything else, but let's just see how we go. I might mix it with a bit of Quin Gold. Yes, I like that color. It's kind of an olivey green. So let's try the Quin Gold with the cobalt teal. Whoa. Yeah, it's not bad. So I kind of like that. To me, those three colors are quite realistic. And then I like using a bit of orange here and there, but I have to be careful how much I use of that. It might be better off that I mix it. So let's mix it with this green. See what we get. That is a very browny green. Let's add some cobalt teal to that. There's another nice green. So all of those. So I'm going to stick with the yellow I used here with a little bit of purple, the Quin, mixing with those. And then where we need to go darker, I'm going to have my purple handy. And I'm going to have my indigo handy. So those can be my colors that darken what I've got here. So the strategy for doing the trees that I like the best is to put dots on the paper, and I'm going to have my yellow brush. So this is my yellow brush. I'm looking at my yellow. I'm thinking I probably need more yellow. So I'm just going to mix a little bit more of that. That's super bright. Maybe too bright, I think, but I think it might settle down if I add a little bit of cobalt teal. Let's see. Whoa. Yeah. It's a bit bright. I think that was caused by the Quin. So maybe if I go back to this yellow. It's very green now. Let's add a bit more purple. So you can go back and forth and back and forth. So it's closer to what I had originally. And we might just use a little bit of this yellow over here.
You will see here that I clearly don't have enough paint, especially later in the video. So make sure you mix at least double or triple the size of the puddles for this part.
What I like to do the most is to add little dots to the paper and then have the color blend from there. And I like to go in sections. So let's start over here we have some blue there already. And in order for that to, actually I need a smaller brush. This might work. So what I want to do is I just want to add some yellow to this area, because that will, oh, that was a dirty brush. That will turn this green. Okay, so I'm just putting in yellow. I'm not putting in any green there. And now I'm going to grab some green, the lightest green I have, which is probably this one. And I'm trying to leave some sky holes. So that's, now this tree actually goes off the page. So I'm going to start with my dots, my water droplets. And because it's already blue here, I'm just throwing those in. And since it goes off the page, I'm going to make sure that it finishes off the page fairly dark. Okay. And then I have some, oops, I'm holding too much water in my brush. So again, this is on the blue. So I'm just adding a little bit of the yellow. And if you got two big droplets, just take your brush, wipe it on your cloth, and grab up those droplets. Okay, well, that's okay. Next one is down here, and this is a fairly big branch, but let's start out here. And again, I'm just putting my droplets on. I'm going to go in with this darker yellow that I have here for this branch. Okay, and then into this green for the bottom of it. This might be actually underneath that one. What I didn't put on my palette was some cobalt or ultramarine blue, so I might end up using that as well. Okay, so I'm trying to cover up these pencil lines. That's my other objective. Okay, and I just want this all to run together. So if it's not running together, if it looks separate, then add a little bit more water. And it should start flowing together a little bit. And then this is where I'm going to use the purple underneath. Because that branch is behind that other one. So I've got to let that dry a little bit, which means I should move on to another branch. I actually might switch brushes for my dots, because I'm looking at this and I'm not really seeing it dropping, how much it's dropping onto the paper. Since my paper is dry, okay, there I'm seeing it, and maybe it's because of the color. Okay, that's good. And then I'm going to go in again with this yellow, which turned out pretty nice. It seems to be separating on the palette, which tells me it might separate in here. So is this one. I think that's a feature of the cobalt. Okay, and then again, I'm going to grab some purple, especially where it crosses the trunk. I like that to be good and dark. Okay, and then a bit of yellow here. Okay, and that is behind the trunk. So as you can see, it's kind of flowing into, I'll zoom in to show you that. Okay, so next one down is this one here, and we have one behind and we have one in front. And I identified quite a few sky holes here, so I want to make sure I honor those. Okay. Add too much water, but I'm just going to go with that for a minute here, and then I'm going to use this other brush to suck some of it up. Okay, and this is where I want a sky hole, sky hole, sky hole. There's a lot of them here. Okay, and then I want to go in with this darker green. Okay, and again, I think I need some purple. I don't know what it is about purple and green, but I just love when they blend together. Okay. Okay, so that's not bad. We'll have to come back for that one because it's going to be darker. And then let's go here. This one is crossing the trunk and also crossing the other tree, which is a good connection. Oops. Okay, gotta remember to clean off my brush when I go into that yellow. Okay, and it would be darker where it crosses the trunk. I probably have too much water there, so I'm picking some up. And I'm not getting a lot of dark coming out of here. Let's pick some of this up. Okay, and then pick up some of our purple. Okay. Okay, I think that's good. All right. Now we have them all the same shape going across, so we need to get some variation of shape. What I can do here is I can have this one turn a corner. That's always useful. Okay, now this one is completely behind the trunk, so we could do that one now. I'm going to go down both sides of the trunk, and then I'm going to start with my darker colors. And because this is crossing over the greenery in the background, it's a good thing that that's dark actually. Okay. I could do that a little bit bigger. Let's do it a little bit bigger here. Typically, once you get to the bottom of the tree, they actually get larger, but we're not seeing that in this tree. Okay. So now, this one would probably be lighter, but it's too close to that one. This one is not close to any, so we can do that one now. Dots first, paint. I'm going into this bright yellow here right now because I'm guessing the sun is coming from this side, but who knows? And we're getting kind of low on paint, and I mixed quite complicated colors, so it's a good thing we're going around the tree because we can mix a new batch of color and not take too much of a risk to not have color harmony. Okay, I think that one also needs purple. I think almost every one of these needs purple. Now, I haven't used any of the ultramarine blue or the cobalt blue. Not really concerned about that. But let's mix our colors again. So we had cobalt.
For the next few sections, I'm going to turn the volume off and just speed it up because it's much the same as you saw already.
Down where the trunks are. So somewhere along here. But we have to be careful that we want it to look kind of natural. Just going to alternate between these colors here, the same way we did up the top. And then this line has to be very straight. We can't have anything interfering with it. There was a little bit of a gap there, so I had to go down. And then the other option is to just add some greenery coming up across the rock. It should be fairly vibrant though, so if we combine the hookers and this, I might do the trick. And then putting a tiny bit of burnt sienna in there, mixed with the yellow. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to just, on the trunk, we want to have the water go down so that it blends into the ground. Same here. And then we need a trunk color, which we could combine the blue and the purple and the green. And well, look, we got a gray here. So the trunk, I'm going to wet it down. We really do have to decide which side the sun's coming from. Let's say it's coming this way, because I see brighter branches over there. But then there was a shadow there, but one advantage is we don't have to worry about our shadow too much. So I'm just putting the trunk in. I wet it first. If the sun is coming from that side, then it's going to be lighter there. Too much water. Okay. There's still too much water here. Yeah. I think I have my gray on this one. Oh, it's still wet. That was not wet, so it ends up going on uneven if it's not wet. So you really do want it to be wet. And then wherever you see branches, right underneath them, it should be darker. Let's get it a bit, our mixture is a bit watery. And sometimes it's darker where the branches cross. Okay. Oop. Dark there. Okay. I like doing this. I like having them go up into the and then you can also do this. You can have the it's going up, but it's also got a few branches supporting it, if that makes any sense. It's a bit too dark there, but so here as an example, we can have one going like this, one going like this, one going like that. So we could probably have another one going like that. So the more of these, I don't know, it just helps. Now I messed up here and the light, lost some of that light. The other way to counter that is to put some more dark. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a thinner brush. This is actually a reservoir brush. I think I've talked about it before, but it's very good for doing branches. The other trick is to, before you do your branch, wet the side of the trunk where you're going to put your branch, and then it kind of glues it onto the branch if you like. So my brush is not wet enough. Something like that. Okay, so I'm going to wet the side. Actually, it's here that that branch is coming out of. Wet the side. This brush is not cooperating today. Kind of lost that effect there, but maybe we'll have it coming out kind of out of the middle. Okay. And then we've got one here. Quite a few coming across. Wet the side where that branch joined. Now I have a situation here which I don't really like, where one goes one way and one goes the other way. So in order to counter that, I think what I'll do is I'll have this go this way.
I'm going to speed up the recording again. It's just painting the branches, so if you need to slow it down, you can do that.
I decided what I'm going to do in order to get rid of the pencil marks is I'm going to wet the paper behind the tree. And I'm going to make it much darker in the water here. And then I don't have to pursue my pencil marks. So this is a beautiful cerulean blue that's going into our water. And I'm going to gray that down slightly. I could actually even green it down a bit. Might even try that. So I'm going to put a bit of neutral tint and a cobalt. So this is a watery mixture. Okay. But really what I want to do here is I want to start identifying this rock. So in order to do so, I need it darker back here, and that's what I'm doing. Okay, now the other strategy is, if you're going to do this, is to do your water darker to begin with, and then you wouldn't have this issue. But I do. And if you're watching this video in order, then you also do. I'm going to wet all of this. Oh, and I made a mistake there. I want to make sure this stays nice and bright. Okay, so I'm going to put that cerulean in like so. Okay, gray it out a little bit at the top. Okay, and then wash it out. Now, what I can do over here is put some in again, just to balance it. Put some of that gray in that we used over there. Put a little bit there. And then we're going to leave that white. And then we're going to join the cerulean down here with this mixture, the gray and the cerulean. Now down here we're going to get quite dark anyway, because we're going to have the shadow from the rock. Oh, a little bit too far there. Okay. And then we need a bit more cerulean, just in this area. So I think that turned out okay. A bit more cerulean over here. Kind of want to match that. Not bad, because what we'll do up here is this is going to be the gray that we used in the rock, which I forget how we got to that gray, but I think we used neutral tint and cerulean. It's one of the colors. And then we had that very light, we had a bit of this with a bit of pink, right? And a bit more pink. And then we had a bit of burnt sienna. Okay, so we're going to try to duplicate that color. Green brush. We're going to try to duplicate that color as part of the rock reflection. Okay, it's not quite as blue as I would like. Okay, so we need to get this a bit grayer, but I don't mind what's happening. It looks okay. And this is going to highlight this part of the rock. We want that to be blurred out. right, we need a little bit of that pink in here. I think that will do it. And now that it's wet, we can do the tree reflection. Bit more neutral tint for that, but not too much. And if you like, we can do it. Oh, I had green paint on my, which actually might work out okay because there's probably green there. Finally, before it's dry, we can go like this. You have to do this level or it doesn't work very well. Put your finger on the bottom of the sheet and then scrape it out. This one went up, so the only way to counter that is to make it bigger. You don't want too many of these, but in my case, I'm trying to get the reflection to look a bit more realistic, and it might help a little bit. So that's it for now, in case I think of something else. Oh, of course, I did think of something else. The other thing to do in the reflection is if you have a dark spot there, you put the dark spot there. If this goes up like this, you can actually add dark spots. So if I add a dark spot here, then I can mirror it down there. Just make sure reflections look a little bit more realistic. If I have some pink at the bottom here, I can put some pinker color at the top. That, whoops, not quite what I wanted to do. So this to me looks like it's a pinky color, which I think it was. So I'm trying to put some of that pink at the top. And if you had a blue color, put it there and then put it here. That's kind of the concept. And then we need a reflection of this part here. Okay, it wasn't wet there, so it's not moving at all, so you can always just wet it. Let me put a bit of a dark spot here. And we did have that tree, but we didn't really do anything with it. It was kind of like a branch that was sticking up, maybe a dead branch. These branches aren't like a dead tree, I guess. So then you could do that and have the dead tree kind of going like this. All right, now I think we're done. Okay, it's the next day, and this is usually what I do. I have a look at my painting the next day with fresh eyes, and there's two things I'm looking for. Things look weird once you take a photograph of it, and the value and contrast that I have in there. So a photograph, and I converted it to black and white, and I want to compare it to my value study to see if I've captured the values appropriately. So obviously I don't have a lot of shadow back in this area. I don't have a lot of darkness in this area, and same with the darkness over on this side. In the photo, of course, this was too dark in the background, so I don't mind that the background is not as dark as what is in the value study. Nothing I can do about the clouds because I can't make things look lighter, but I can certainly make things look darker, and I can fade and soften some things out. All right, let's see if we've made any improvement. This was our prior picture. And let's just go back and put the saturation back up. And this is our current picture. So we've added quite a bit more darks. We probably could go even darker in the trunk still. Highlighted these rocks, which I think worked out well. It's here. So I think what I'll do is I'll wet these down first, because it does work better once the paper is wet. And that will help. I normally don't put my pencil lines in this dark, but when you're teaching, you kind of need to show where all the pencil marks are. So I'm just rubbing that gently. Now I've got my more heavy duty scrubber, and I'm going to go in with that. So I'm expanding the tree a bit as I go down, and then here I'm actually going to make it a bit skinnier. So that's skinny, and then that should work out a little bit better. So I think that's going to work out a bit better. And then the other thing that I have issue with in this tree is there's not a lot of, it's all hard edged. There's not a lot of soft edges. So if the branch is going out into the background, that's an opportunity to have a soft edge, and it helps give it some perspective. So I'm just going to soften some of these edges while I get rid of the pencil marks that are there. And this brush is a bit too aggressive, so I think I'll go with this one because it's a bit softer. No, but it doesn't really get into the pencil marks. So I'm just softening out that whole branch, and that should help put it into the background. Okay. Now it does cross here on the trunk, so if it was in the background, then that wouldn't happen. So again, I'm going to go and soften that part out. I've also got a hard line here, so I'm going to soften that. And I think that's probably about it for that one. This one, same thing. We have an issue where it's dark on this side, but it doesn't really blend across. So we can do that with paint, though. I think that's better to do with paint. So let's concentrate on the one thing we wanted to do was to have some of these with lost edges. So this one could be far in the background, so let's just soften it out. Wipe off our brush, because now we've got paint on that. Okay. And then take the softening brush and kind of blur this branch out a little bit. So it pushes it back, which gives you a bit more perspective to the tree. Okay, so the other one I'd like to do that with is this one, but it's darker, which brings it forward. But we'll try it over there and see how that works. So we're just gonna be really delicate with softening this one because that's pretty dark paint. Let it soak in for a little bit. Cleaning my brush, and then I'm going to go in with this really small soft one and just see what happens if I try to push this into the background. So I want it to look like it's behind this one. Okay, so I think that worked well. Okay. Okay, so maybe the way we need to look at it is which one is closest to us. Maybe this one is. I don't want to soften everything here. But just a few of the tops. You know, some of this is very nice where it blends into the other colors. And I do like that feature. Okay, that one's a bit difficult to soften. It's a pencil mark. Okay, I think that helps. There's a bit of hard edges, a bit of soft edges. That whole thing is working for me. And generally you're going to soften edges that trail off of the painting. Okay, so how to fix this one. That one we need to add paint into. And it's quite dark. This is probably a bit wet still. So in this one here, I want to bring some of that paint down. We have kind of a cobalty color there mixed with cerulean, right? So I'm just going to bring that into this part. Okay, well, that's okay. We'll wait to fix that because we want it to be completely dry before we tackle that. Okay, so we fixed that area. The other area is this one is drawing a fair amount of attention. And the other issue is we're definitely not dark enough at the whole bottom of these rocks here. So we need to put a wash on the bottom here that blends out this way but doesn't cover too much of this whiteness here. And we need to choose the color probably similar to this but a bit darker. So let's mix up color that might work for that. So I'm going to keep with my cerulean. Put some water onto the palette. Maybe I'll turn this so you can see it better. Okay, and I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt to that. And then I'm going to add some neutral tint. So it's quite gray there, which I think is fine. If you look at the original photo, let's see if I can find the photo handy enough. So the original photo, they've got it very blue, and then they've got the tree trunks quite a lot darker than we do. But let's go with this coat because I don't really want to lose the color of the reflection of the rock. And the first thing I should do is wet my paper. I want to be very careful. This holds a lot of water, but it has a good enough point to it that I can go around these. This is the most critical because we want this rock edge to be highlighted. And then use a bigger brush to wash that out like so. I think what I'll do is I'll put a tiny bit of burnt sienna in there as well, just because it helps darken it. So we'll go back into the cobalt, into the cerulean. Okay, we want a fairly robust mix here. Okay, bit of burnt sienna. So it's quite a green color right now. Let's go a bit more cerulean, make it a bit bluer. Okay, I think that might work. So I'm going to start at the most important edge. Okay, and go right along. Got a hair on there, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. Okay. And then I'm going to put just a bit of gray right underneath there. Okay. And then I'm going to do what I did before with the tree trunks. I'm not doing them totally, leaving little gaps. So I think that helps a bit. It's quite a bit darker than what it was, but the paper's still wet. I did want to show a bit of this reddish color down here, so I'm just going to throw in a bit of pink into that mixture. And I really need to identify the top of this nicely. Okay, and then the other thing is we wanted some green into that. Probably enough. I wouldn't do too much of that because that's actually quite a bright green. So I'm going to neutralize it with some purple. I think that might do it. Thicker mixture for our tree trunk. We got this line that kind of goes there. Just trying to show some reflections of things. Okay, something like that. Now the dark looks quite dark right now, but that's going to fade a bit as well. And the other thing you can do is just dry your brush off and just blur it a bit. Okay. So I think that is a bit darker. It's not a huge amount of darkness, but a bit darker. This is critical that they say only do these lines once where you're covering a bright spot. It has to be twice as dark as what's there, and you can't do it multiple times. Okay, so I think we're okay with that. And then the other challenge was how to get the rocks darker at the bottom. These show, you know, quite a lot of darkness at the bottom of the rocks. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a mixture of ultramarine and indigo and just wet, well, wait till that dries and then wet the bottom of the rocks and apply that mixture in. So that's going to fix them. And then, oh, but we did want to put that green in, so maybe we better do that first. Okay, so we need to put some dark green in there. And I'm going to make that with purple. And it was right here that we really needed it, right? I think that helps identify that trunk well. And then I'm just going to drop a tiny bit of water in there to soften that out. Okay, so now we straightened out our tree. If we decide the sunny side is from here, we could kind of add a bit more darkness into our tree and maybe do that. So the first thing though is the tree needs to be wet. I'm going to avoid this tree we just did, but the tree trunk has to be wet all the way across. Otherwise you end up just creating a line down it. Okay, so now it's wet. I'm looking at it, bobbing my head up and down, and making sure the coverage of the water is even. So it looks pretty even. So now we're going to go in with this darker mixture, especially at the bottom. And we're going to put that in. Grab a bit more dark for that bend. And just straightening out some of these lines that were not really smooth the first time. I think there's an opportunity to have this part of the trunk straightened out as well. And as I can see, there's no water drifting across, so that wasn't wet enough there. Once again, I'm going to wet this part. I'm going down at paper level to see how wet that is. Just a few spots there. And down here, I can also go across like this. Too much water, I can see right away that I went over my edge there. I'm just going to add in a bit of dark down the bottom here. And then I can start working on this tree, but I'll start at the top. Wet it down. This part here needs to be wet. Okay. Now I think that's where I painted earlier, so I may not go down that far. Okay, just let that come across a bit. Okay, if it's too hard edged, soften it out. Add a bit of water. Okay, so it's starting to have a little bit more dimension in there, and that's all because of the darks. Okay, put it on, soften it out. Okay, not bad. I don't like this rough edge, but I think I'm being a bit too picky at this point. Okay, let's have a look at that and see if that is something we want to do. It would have to go this way. Typically what I would do with a shadow is I'd first put the water in, and then I would use a bit of a bluer mixture, and I would drop that just where I put the water. And I have to have a fair amount of water, so I'm going to use this brush. Okay. And then maybe there's a shadow over on this side a bit. That might help us get rid of that white mark that I didn't like there as well. So it's a shadow from a tree branch coming across here. And make sure you round them out at the end. That's good enough.